Jenna Thompson had always been the girl who preferred books over boys, quiet walks over parties, and was often labeled as a little awkward by her classmates. She wasn't particularly concerned with her appearance, and she certainly wasn't the type to chase after the school's heartthrob, but that didn't stop fate from weaving her into the life of the most notorious boy in school, Alexander Knight. Alexander, known for his striking good looks, bad boy attitude, and the son of one of the wealthiest families in town, ruled the school with his confidence and arrogance. Everyone either feared or adored him, but Jenna, she couldn't stand him. She found his arrogance unbearable, especially since he treated people like they were beneath him. On Jenna's first day at her new school, the two crossed paths in the worst way. She was lost, trying to find her classroom, when she accidentally bumped into Alexander. Her books scattered across the floor, and as she frantically tried to pick them up, Alexander simply stared down at her with his trademark smirk. "Watch where you're going next time," he said lazily, not even bothering to help, as his friends snickered behind him. Jenna's cheeks flushed with embarrassment and anger. She shot him a glare, stood up, and without a word, walked away. From that moment, she vowed to avoid him at all costs. She hated his type, spoiled, arrogant, and completely insufferable. Little did she know that one encounter would be the beginning of something far more complicated. Jenna's determination to steer clear of Alexander, fate seemed to have other plans. It wasn't long before their paths crossed again and again. To her horror, Jenna found out that they were in the same math class, seated only a few desks apart. Worse still, their teacher paired them up as study partners for the semester. Jenna was furious. How could she possibly work with him? She had heard all the stories about Alexander's reputation, how he skipped classes, charmed the teachers, and rarely took anything seriously. She didn't need someone like him to drag down her grades, especially since math wasn't her strongest subject. Their first study session was nothing short of a disaster. Alexander arrived late, looking bored and disinterested, while Jenna had already neatly organized all the materials they needed. "I'm not here to babysit you," she snapped the moment he sat down. "We're supposed to be partners, so at least try to make an effort." Alexander raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by her frustration. "Relax, bookworm," he said with a smirk. "It's just a study session, not life or death." Jenna clenched her fists in frustration. She had no idea how she was going to survive the semester with someone like him, but she was determined to make sure his lack of effort didn't affect her grades. Meanwhile, Alexander seemed to enjoy teasing her, seeing how easily she was flustered. What Jenna didn't realize, however, was that Alexander had taken notice of her in a way he hadn't with other girls. Her feisty spirit, her refusal to be charmed by him, and her determination to stand up to him intrigued him. He wasn't used to girls treating him with such disdain. It was refreshing, and it made him curious about her. Weeks passed, and to Jenna's surprise, something started to shift. Though Alexander remained his arrogant, confident self, there were moments when he actually contributed to their study sessions. At first, Jenna thought it was just a fluke, but as time went on, she noticed that he was smarter than he let on. He would occasionally solve difficult problems with ease, all while pretending he wasn't trying. One afternoon, during one of their study sessions, Jenna struggled with a particularly complex math problem. She frowned at the paper, feeling frustrated and on the verge of giving up, when Alexander unexpectedly leaned over and offered to help. "Here," he said, pointing to her notes, "you're overcomplicating it. It's simpler than you think." Jenna looked at him in surprise. He explained the solution with ease, and for the first time, Jenna saw a side of him that she hadn't expected. He wasn't just all bravado. He was actually helpful. "Why do you pretend not to care when you're obviously smart?" Jenna asked, unable to hide her curiosity. Alexander leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he studied her. "Because it's easier that way," he said cryptically. "People expect me to be a certain way, so I let them believe what they want." Jenna didn't know how to respond to that. She had never thought of it like that. Maybe Alexander wasn't as shallow as she had thought. Maybe there was more to him than just the arrogant bad boy. The more Jenna worked with Alexander, the more she found herself questioning her initial judgment of him. He still had his arrogant moments, of course, but there were flashes of something deeper beneath his facade. He was more observant than she realized, and every now and then, he would say or do something that caught her off guard. One afternoon, they ended up sitting outside to study. It was a rare warm day, and as they worked through their notes, Jenna noticed a group of younger students playing basketball nearby. Suddenly, one of the boys fell and hurt his knee. Without a word, Alexander stood up, walked over to the boy, and helped him up, offering words of encouragement before walking back. Jenna watched the scene in stunned silence. She had always assumed Alexander was self-centered, but what she had just witnessed told a different story. When he returned to their study spot, she couldn't help but ask, "Why did you help that kid?" Alexander shrugged as if it was no big deal. "Because he needed help," he replied simply. Jenna found herself staring at him, realizing that maybe, just maybe, she had misjudged him. There was something about his nonchalant kindness that made her heart soften toward him, even if she didn't want to admit it. From that day on, Jenna found it harder and harder to hate Alexander. He still drove her crazy with his teasing and his arrogance, but she couldn't deny that he was also kind and surprisingly thoughtful. Slowly, the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble, and she started to see him in a new light. Unbeknownst to Jenna, Alexander had also started to feel something he hadn't felt before. There was something about Jenna, her intelligence, her honesty, and her unwillingness to play the games that others did, that intrigued him. He found himself wanting to spend more time with her, not just to tease her, but because he genuinely enjoyed her company. As the semester wore on, their relationship slowly evolved. What had started as mutual disdain turned into an unexpected friendship, and perhaps something more. As the weeks passed, the dynamic between Jenna and Alexander shifted from one of frustration to an undeniable connection. Their study sessions, which had once been a battlefield of opposing personalities, now flowed with more ease. Jenna couldn't help but notice the small changes in Alexander's demeanor. He was still cocky, but there was something more beneath the surface, a sense of vulnerability that she hadn't noticed before. One day, after a particularly tough math session, Alexander leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on her. "You know, you're not as much of a nerd as I thought," he said with a smirk. Jenna rolled her eyes, but couldn't stop the slight smile from forming on her lips. "And you're not as much of an arrogant jerk as I thought," she shot back. Alexander chuckled, but his expression softened. "You're different from the other girls, Jenna. You don't care about the things they care about. You don't care about me the way they do." Jenna blinked, her heart skipping a beat. She wasn't sure how to respond, so she quickly gathered her books, trying to avoid his gaze. I just don't fall for people who think the world revolves around them." "Maybe that's why I like you," Alexander said quietly, catching her off guard. His words hung in the air, leaving Jenna speechless. For the rest of the evening, Jenna couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. Could it be that Alexander, the bad boy with the perfect looks and impossible ego, had feelings for her? The idea was both terrifying and thrilling at the same time. But Jenna refused to let herself get caught up in a fantasy. She couldn't fall for him. She wouldn't. But even as she told herself this, her heart was beginning to betray her. Despite Jenna's internal resistance, her relationship with Alexander continued to deepen. They spent more time together, both in and out of their study sessions. At first, it was under the guise of group projects and schoolwork, but Jenna began to realize that they were spending time together simply because they wanted to. One Friday afternoon, Alexander suggested they take a break from studying and go grab coffee at a nearby cafe. Jenna hesitated, unsure of what this hangout might mean, but eventually agreed. Sitting across from Alexander, sipping on her latte, Jenna couldn't help but notice the looks they were getting from other students. Girls stared at her with jealousy, and boys looked at Alexander with envy. It was an odd feeling, being in the spotlight because of him. As they talked, Jenna found herself laughing at Alexander's witty remarks and even sharing things about herself she hadn't told many people. He listened, genuinely interested, and for once, Jenna felt like she wasn't just the dumb girl everyone thought she was. Alexander saw her as something more, something valuable. As the sun began to set, Alexander walked her home, and Jenna's heart raced with every step. She couldn't deny the chemistry between them anymore, but there was still a part of her that was scared. Scared of getting hurt, scared of falling for someone who might not feel the same way. Before parting, Alexander stopped in front of her house and turned to her with that familiar smirk. "You know, Jenna, you've been on my mind a lot lately." Jenna blushed, looking down at her shoes. "Don't get cocky," she muttered. But Alexander wasn't teasing this time. He stepped closer, his voice soft. "I mean it. You're not like anyone I've ever met." Jenna's heart pounded in her chest as she met his gaze. She wanted to say something, anything, but before she could, Alexander leaned down and gently pressed his lips to her cheek. A simple, soft kiss that left her breathless. "See you tomorrow," he said with a wink, leaving Jenna standing on her porch, her mind spinning. After that night, everything changed. Jenna tried to keep her distance, tried to maintain the walls she had built around her heart, but it was no use. Alexander had worked his way into her life, and no matter how much she wanted to deny it, she was falling for him. Their study sessions became less about math and more about each other. Alexander opened up to her in ways that surprised Jenna. He told her about his troubled relationship with his father, the pressure of living up to his family's expectations, and how he often acted out because it was easier than facing the disappointment. Jenna, in turn, shared her own insecurities, how she had always felt like the dumb girl, how people underestimated her because she wasn't flashy or popular. Alexander listened without judgment, and for the first time in her life, Jenna felt truly understood. One afternoon, as they sat in the school courtyard, Jenna couldn't help but ask, "Why do you act like that? The whole bad boy thing. Is it really who you are?" Alexander shrugged, looking up at the sky. "It's easier to let people believe what they want. No one expects anything from me if I play the part." "But that's not you," Jenna said softly. "You're more than that." Alexander looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe, but you're the only one who's ever seen it." Jenna's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. She wanted to reach out and hold him, to tell him that she saw him for who he truly was. But before she could, Alexander stood up, pulling her with him. "Come on," he said, his usual cocky grin returning. "Let's get out of here." Jenna knew it was only a matter of time before her feelings for Alexander would spill out, and one evening, after a long study session that had turned into a heart-to-heart, she couldn't hold back any longer. They were sitting on the school's rooftop, watching the sunset. The golden light cast a warm glow over Alexander's face, and Jenna found herself lost in the moment. "I need to tell you something," Jenna said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander turned to her, his eyes filled with curiosity. "What is it?" Jenna took a deep breath, her heart racing. "I didn't expect this, any of this. I didn't expect to like you, but I do. I think I might be falling for you." For a moment, there was silence. Jenna's stomach twisted in knots as she waited for his response. What if he didn't feel the same? What if she had just made a fool of herself? But then Alexander reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I've been falling for you since the day we met," he admitted, his voice soft and sincere. "I just didn't know how to tell you." Jenna's heart soared, and without thinking, she leaned in and kissed him. This time, it wasn't a soft kiss on the cheek. It was real, full of the emotions they had both been holding back for so long. As they pulled away, Alexander rested his forehead against hers, his smile soft and genuine. "You're not just some dumb girl, Jenna. You're everything I didn't know I needed." Jenna's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of happiness. She had spent so long hiding behind her walls, but with Alexander, she felt safe enough to let them down. With their feelings for each other out in the open, Jenna and Alexander's relationship blossomed in ways they hadn't expected. They spent more time together, not just studying but going on long walks, sneaking out for late-night adventures, and sharing their dreams for the future. The school buzzed with gossip about their unlikely relationship, but neither of them cared. They were happy, and that was all that mattered. For the first time in her life, Jenna felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be, by Alexander's side. And as for Alexander, he had finally found someone who saw him for who he truly was, not the bad boy everyone else thought they knew. As they stood hand in hand, looking out at the city from their favorite rooftop, Jenna couldn't help but smile. She had hated Alexander at first, but now she couldn't imagine her life without him. As Jenna and Alexander's relationship deepened, they soon faced their first challenge. One morning, as Jenna walked into school, she overheard a group of girls gossiping near the lockers. "I don't understand why Alexander is wasting his time with Jenna," one girl sneered. "She's so plain, and we all know she's not the brightest." "Right?" another chimed in. "He's probably just using her for fun. No way a guy like him is serious about someone like her." Jenna's heart sank. She had spent her whole life battling the label of being dumb, and hearing those words again made all her insecurities rush to the surface. Though Alexander had never given her a reason to doubt him, the fear of not being enough lingered in the back of her mind. Later that day, during lunch, Jenna couldn't hide her unease. Alexander noticed immediately, his sharp eyes catching the way she kept glancing down at her food without eating. "What's going on?" he asked, placing a hand on hers. Jenna hesitated, but then she let the words spill out. "I heard some girls talking about us. They think you're just using me." Alexander frowned, his expression darkening. "Jenna, you know that's not true." "I know," she said softly, avoiding his gaze, "but sometimes it feels like maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not good enough for you." Without a word, Alexander stood up, pulling her with him. He led her out of the cafeteria, ignoring the curious stares of their classmates. Once they were outside, he turned to her, his eyes intense. "Don't ever say that again," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You are more than enough, Jenna. You're smart, funny, kind, and real. I don't care what anyone else thinks. I'm with you because I want to be, and nothing they say will change that." Jenna looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "But what if—" "No buts," Alexander interrupted. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch tender. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." Jenna's heart swelled with emotion, and for the first time, she truly believed him. She leaned into his touch, letting the warmth of his words wash over her. In that moment, all her doubts melted away. As Jenna and Alexander grew closer, they found support from an unexpected source, Alexander's sister, Emily. Though Emily had initially been wary of Jenna, she quickly warmed up to her once she saw how much her brother cared about her. One afternoon, Jenna was sitting with Emily at a cafe, waiting for Alexander to finish football practice. Emily had invited her out, and though Jenna had been nervous at first, she soon realized that Emily wasn't like the other popular girls at school. "So," Emily said, sipping her iced coffee, "how are things going with my brother? He hasn't stopped talking about you lately." Jenna blushed, feeling a mix of embarrassment and pride. "Things are good. He's different from what I expected." Emily smirked. "Yeah, he puts up this tough front, but deep down, he's a softie. You're good for him, Jenna. I've never seen him this happy." Jenna smiled, but there was still a part of her that felt uncertain. "It's just, sometimes I wonder if we're too different. I'm not like the girls he used to date." "Good," Emily said firmly. "Those girls were shallow and cared more about his looks and status than who he really is. You're different. You see the real Alexander, and that's why he's fallen for you." Jenna's heart fluttered at Emily's words. Hearing this from someone so close to Alexander gave her a newfound sense of confidence. "Thanks, Emily," Jenna said, grateful for the unexpected support. "Anytime," Emily replied with a grin. "Just make sure you keep him in line. He can be a handful." As Jenna's confidence grew, so did the attention she and Alexander received at school. But with attention came jealousy, especially from one girl, Madison, who had once been Alexander's on-and-off fling. Madison couldn't stand the fact that Alexander had chosen Jenna over her, and she made it her mission to drive a wedge between them. One day, she cornered Jenna by the lockers, her eyes flashing with malice. "You really think Alexander is serious about you?" Madison sneered. "Please, he's just using you to pass the time. Once he's bored, he'll come running back to me." Jenna's chest tightened, but she stood her ground. "You're wrong. He cares about me." Madison laughed, a cruel sound that echoed down the hallway. "Oh, sweetie, you're so naive. Do you even know about his past? About all the girls he's been with? You're just another one of them." Jenna's confidence wavered, the insecurities she had worked so hard to overcome creeping back in. But before Madison could say anything more, a familiar voice interrupted. "Madison, back off." Jenna looked up to see Alexander standing a few feet away, his expression cold and unyielding. Madison's smirk faltered. "Alexander, I know exactly what you were doing," he said, stepping closer. "And it stops now. Jenna is with me, and nothing you say or do is going to change that." Madison glared at him, her eyes narrowing in anger. But seeing that she had no power over him, she huffed and stormed off. Alexander turned to Jenna, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" Jenna nodded, though her heart still raced from the confrontation. I don't want to be one of those girls who gets hurt." "You won't be," Alexander said, his voice filled with conviction. "I'm not going anywhere, Jenna. I'm with you, and I'm not letting anyone come between us." As their relationship continued to flourish, Alexander decided to do something special for Jenna. He knew that she had always felt out of place at the fancy events their school held, so he planned a night that would make her feel like the most important person in the world. One evening, Alexander picked Jenna up from her house, telling her to dress up for a surprise. Jenna, curious but trusting, put on her favorite dress and stepped outside to find Alexander waiting with a bouquet of her favorite flowers. "Where are we going?" Jenna asked, smiling as she accepted the flowers. "You'll see," Alexander replied, his eyes twinkling with mischief. They drove to the outskirts of town, where Alexander had arranged a private dinner under the stars. The setup was simple but beautiful, twinkling fairy lights, a cozy blanket, and a picnic of Jenna's favorite foods. Jenna's heart swelled with emotion as she looked around. "Alexander, this is amazing." He smiled, pulling her close. "I wanted to do something special for you. You deserve it." They spent the night talking, laughing, and enjoying each other's company. As they lay under the stars, Alexander turned to Jenna, his expression serious. "I know I haven't always been the best guy," he said quietly, "but with you, I want to be better. I want to be the guy you deserve." Jenna's heart melted at his words. "You already are," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him. That night, as they lay in each other's arms, Jenna knew that she had found something rare and special. Alexander might have been the school's bad boy, but with her, he was someone entirely different. Someone real, someone she loved. As graduation approached, Jenna and Alexander found themselves facing the uncertainty of the future. College applications, career plans, and the possibility of going to different schools loomed over them, but they were determined to make it work. One afternoon, as they sat in the school courtyard, Jenna voiced her concerns. "What if we end up at different colleges? What if we can't see each other as much?" Alexander took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure it out. I'm not letting you go, Jenna. No matter what happens, we'll make it work." Jenna smiled, feeling reassured by his words. She knew that their relationship wouldn't always be easy, but she also knew that they had something worth fighting for. Graduation day came and went, and as Jenna and Alexander stood together, caps and gowns in hand, they couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. What had started as a tumultuous, unlikely relationship had blossomed into something real and lasting. Jenna had gone from hating Alexander's arrogance to loving the person he truly was, and Alexander had found someone who saw him for more than just his reputation. As they looked toward the future, they knew there would be challenges, but they also knew that they would face them together. And for the first time in a long time, Jenna felt like she had found exactly where she belonged, right by Alexander's side. With their diplomas in hand and the world at their feet, Jenna and Alexander walked into the next chapter of their lives, ready to face whatever came their way, as long as they had each other. After graduation, Jenna and Alexander found themselves standing at a crossroads. Both had been accepted into different universities, Jenna into a smaller college a few hours away, and Alexander at a prestigious business school in the city. The excitement of their new beginnings was tempered by the reality that they wouldn't see each other every day like before. Though they had promised to make things work, the distance added a layer of uncertainty. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of Alexander's house, overlooking the city lights, Jenna voiced her concerns. "I'm scared, Alex. What if the distance changes everything?" Alexander wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "It won't change us," he said, his voice steady. "We're stronger than that. Yeah, it'll be tough, but I'll come see you every weekend. And we'll text, call. We'll make it work, I promise." Jenna leaned into him, her heart heavy but hopeful. She believed in their connection, but she couldn't shake the fear of drifting apart. Still, she knew Alexander would fight for them, and that was enough for her, at least for now. As their first weeks apart passed, both Jenna and Alexander threw themselves into their respective studies. Jenna found herself struggling to adjust to college life, the pressures of academics weighing on her. The label of being dumb still haunted her, and she worked twice as hard as her peers, determined to prove herself. Alexander, meanwhile, thrived in his environment. His natural charisma and sharp mind quickly made him a standout at his business school, but he found that his newfound success felt empty without Jenna by his side. He missed her laugh, the way she challenged him to be better, and how she always believed in him when no one else did. Despite their busy schedules, they texted constantly, sending each other pictures and updates about their days. But as the weeks wore on, Jenna started to notice a shift. Alexander seemed more distant, his messages shorter, and their phone calls more sporadic. It worried her, but she convinced herself it was just the stress of their new lives. One Friday, after Alexander canceled their weekend plans to visit, Jenna sat in her dorm room, staring at her phone. For the first time since they started dating, she felt truly alone. The fear that she had always held at bay began to creep back in. The distance began to take its toll. Though Alexander still cared deeply for Jenna, his life at business school was fast-paced and demanding. He was constantly surrounded by new people, and one of them was Brianna, an ambitious, confident girl who quickly became his friend. Brianna admired Alexander's work ethic and often helped him with projects, and their friendship grew. Jenna noticed Alexander talking about Brianna more often, and though she trusted him, a part of her felt uneasy. One weekend when Alexander was supposed to visit, he canceled at the last minute, saying he had to work on a group project with Brianna. Jenna's heart sank, though she tried to brush it off as no big deal. However, the nagging feeling that something was changing between them wouldn't go away. As the weeks passed, the emotional distance between her and Alexander grew, and the girl who had once hated him for being arrogant now feared losing him to another girl. One night, Jenna couldn't take it anymore. She called Alexander, her heart pounding as the phone rang. "Hey, Jenna," he answered, sounding distracted. "I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you back?" "Alex, we need to talk," Jenna said, her voice trembling. I feel like I'm losing you." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment, Jenna feared he had hung up. Then Alexander sighed. "I'm sorry, Jenna. I've just been so busy with school. I know I haven't been around as much, but you're not losing me. I promise." But Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. "It's not just that," she said. "It's Brianna. You talk about her all the time, and I feel like you're spending more time with her than with me." Alexander hesitated. "She's just a friend, Jenna. There's nothing between us." "Are you sure?" Jenna whispered, her heart breaking a little more with each second of silence that followed. "Yeah," he finally said. "I'm sure." But as Jenna hung up the phone, she couldn't ignore the ache in her chest. Something had shifted between them, and no matter how much she wanted to believe otherwise, she knew things weren't the same. The weeks leading up to winter break were tense. Jenna and Alexander spoke less, and when they did, their conversations were stilted, filled with unspoken fears and doubts. Finally, over the holiday, they both returned home, and it was time to confront their relationship head-on. One snowy evening, Alexander picked Jenna up for a drive. They hadn't spoken about their problems in person yet, but both knew the conversation was inevitable. As they drove through the familiar streets of their hometown, Alexander broke the silence. "I've been thinking," he said, glancing over at Jenna, "about us." Jenna's heart raced, but she stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. "I know things haven't been easy lately," he admitted, "and I know I haven't been around as much, but I want you to know that I still care about you, Jenna, more than anything." Tears welled in Jenna's eyes. "Then why does it feel like I'm losing you?" Alexander pulled the car over and turned to face her, his eyes filled with regret. "I messed up," he said. "I let school and everything else get in the way, and I didn't make enough time for you. But I don't want to lose you, Jenna. You mean more to me than anything else." Jenna wiped away her tears, her heart torn. "I don't want to lose you either," she whispered, "but I can't keep feeling like I'm second place in your life." "You're not," Alexander said firmly, "and I'll prove it to you. I'll make things right. No more excuses, no more distractions. I love you, Jenna, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to show you that." In that moment, Jenna saw the sincerity in his eyes, and she knew he meant every word. The boy she had once hated had grown into a man who was willing to fight for her, and she realized that despite all the challenges, she loved him too. As they sat together in the quiet car, snow falling gently around them, Jenna felt a sense of peace wash over her. They still had a long road ahead of them, but she knew they would face it together, stronger and more in love than ever before. And as Alexander leaned in to kiss her, Jenna knew that this was only the beginning of their next chapter, one they would write together, hand in hand. After their heartfelt conversation, Jenna and Alexander knew that rebuilding their relationship wouldn't happen overnight. They both had to make a conscious effort to change the way they approached their lives. Alexander, who had always been so focused on school and his future, began setting aside time to be more present for Jenna. He made sure to visit her at her college more often and even helped her study, becoming a steady source of support in her academic struggles. Jenna, who had been overwhelmed by her fear of losing Alexander, started to open up more about her insecurities. She told him how being labeled as dumb her whole life still haunted her, making her feel unworthy of someone as confident and successful as him. Alexander reassured her that she was brilliant in her own way, and that the labels from her past didn't define her. Through their honest conversations, they began to understand each other on a deeper level than ever before. Alexander realized that he had been so driven to succeed that he hadn't fully appreciated Jenna's unique strengths. She wasn't just smart, she was kind, patient, and determined, qualities that made him fall even harder for her. Meanwhile, Jenna saw a different side of Alexander. Beneath the confident exterior, he carried his own insecurities, about living up to expectations, about always being the best. They both realized that they were more similar than they had thought, and this newfound understanding brought them closer together. Just as things seemed to be getting back on track, Brianna re-entered the picture. Over the holiday break, she reached out to Alexander, asking him to meet up. Brianna had always been straightforward about her feelings for him, and while Alexander had made it clear that he was with Jenna, Brianna wasn't one to back down easily. At first, Alexander considered ignoring her message. He didn't want to risk his relationship with Jenna, especially after they had worked so hard to rebuild it. But Brianna insisted that it was just a friendly catch-up, and against his better judgment, he agreed to meet her for coffee. When Jenna found out, she felt a familiar pang of jealousy. She trusted Alexander, but the idea of him spending time with Brianna made her uneasy. She didn't want to be the jealous girlfriend, but she also didn't want to let her fears fester in silence. That night, Jenna confronted Alexander. "Why didn't you tell me you were meeting Brianna?" Alexander sighed. I didn't think it was a big deal. It's just coffee. But it feels like a big deal to me, Jenna said, her voice trembling. I don't want to be controlling, but she's clearly into you, and I'm scared that she'll come between us again. Alexander took her hands in his. Jenna, I love you. Brianna is just a friend, nothing more. I promise you, there's nothing going on. Jenna nodded, though the uneasy feeling still lingered. She knew she had to trust Alexander, but she couldn't shake the thought that Brianna wasn't giving up easily. As the semester went on, Brianna continued to insert herself into Alexander's life. She showed up at his study group sessions, invited him to parties, and even started asking for help on projects she didn't really need assistance with. Alexander, wanting to keep things civil, tried to maintain a friendly distance, but it became clear that Brianna's intentions weren't as innocent as she claimed. One evening, after a particularly exhausting week, Alexander found himself alone with Brianna after a group study session. She leaned in, closer than necessary, and whispered, "You know, Alex, you and I would make an unstoppable team. I've seen the way you look at me." Alexander froze, realizing how far things had gone. "Brianna, stop. I'm with Jenna, and I love her. Whatever you think is happening between us, it's not." Brianna's smile faltered, her confidence wavering for the first time. "You're serious about her?" "Yes," Alexander said firmly. "Jenna's the one I want. Always has been." Brianna's expression hardened. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you when you realize I'm the better match for you." Alexander walked away, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time, he had made it crystal clear to Brianna that his heart belonged to Jenna, and he felt a renewed sense of commitment to his relationship. While Alexander was handling his situation with Brianna, Jenna was thriving in her studies. After months of hard work and dedication, she had finally begun to see the results. Her grades improved, and she even received praise from one of her professors for a particularly well-written essay. Jenna, who had always doubted her academic abilities, felt a surge of pride. She called Alexander to share the good news, and his excitement for her was palpable. "I knew you could do it," he exclaimed. "You're amazing, Jenna." For the first time in a long while, Jenna felt truly confident in herself. She wasn't just Alexander's girlfriend. She was her own person, capable of achieving great things on her own terms. This newfound self-assurance strengthened their relationship even more, as Jenna no longer felt like she was living in Alexander's shadow. As the end of the school year approached, both Jenna and Alexander reflected on how far they had come. The distance that once threatened to tear them apart had only made them stronger. They had faced their insecurities, dealt with the challenges of long distance, and emerged on the other side more in love than ever. On the last day of the semester, Alexander surprised Jenna by showing up at her dorm with flowers. "I couldn't wait until the weekend," he said, grinning. "I had to see you." Jenna laughed, pulling him into a hug. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. They spent the evening reminiscing about their journey, how they had started as enemies, how they had fallen in love, and all the obstacles they had overcome. In that moment, they both knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Alexander looked at Jenna, his eyes filled with affection. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me," he said softly. "I never thought I'd fall for the girl who hated me, but here we are." Jenna smiled, feeling a sense of contentment she hadn't known was possible. "I never thought I'd fall for the arrogant bad boy," she teased, "but I'm glad I did." As they kissed under the stars, Jenna knew that this was only the beginning of their next adventure, one they would write together, side by side. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.